Apple Knocker Radio.
Okay, so the basic idea of the Twilight of Pluto, the framing concept, is that astrological events are the indicators of changes in human history and collective consciousness. Of course, they indicate other things as well. But we can, by watching things going on in the heavens and by watching the way human beings respond to things going on in the heavens, we can get a certain amount of perspective on what's going on in the world. This is part of the branch of astrology called mundane astrology, which doesn't get as much attention nowadays as some. It's not about personalities. It's about nations. It's about cultures. It's about the rise and fall of ideas and the rise and fall of basic themes in human society and human activity. So this is something that has been going on, of course, for a very long time. Probably, as far as we know, people first discovered the planets as distinct from the sun and moon something like 6,000 years ago. And that's a subject we can get into as we continue the discussion. But it is interesting that right about the time that the planets were identified as something separate from the stars, not just another set of stars, but these little disks that were moving across the sky in their own patterns, that's about the same time that each of the things those planets rule came into being. We have, more or less all at once, we have the rise of agriculture, which is Saturn. We have originally a rise of gardening, because that preceded field agriculture, of course. That's Venus. A lot of basic crafts, pottery is a Venus thing, weaving is a Venus thing, and all these things sort of popped into being. And then you have the invention of agriculture and of architecture beyond the sort of tribal hut level. That's also Saturn. You have the emergence of governments and of established religions. That's Jupiter. You have warfare. That's Mars. And then of course you have writing. You have various other forms of communication. You have the beginnings of written culture. That's all Mercury. So as those planets were discovered, these corresponding factors in human society popped into being. And so, those 5 planets, plus the sun and moon, were what people knew about until, 1781. 1781, there is George Herschel staring through his telescope, through one of the best new telescopes in the world, and he sees what ought to be a star, except it's not. It's too big. It has a disk. No matter what kind of telescope you're using, by the way, I don't know how many of our listeners have done astronomy and actually looked through telescopes. If you need a really big telescope, stars are little dots. They do not become disks. They're not close enough. But so here he was staring through his big new reflector telescope, and there's this little pale disk. Puts on a new eyepiece to give him more powerful. The disk gets larger. Put on yet another eyepiece to make the more powerful eyepiece he has. The disk gets larger still. Okay, it's got to be something. Is it a comet? Well, it doesn't seem like one. It doesn't change. It doesn't move the way comets move. It moves the way a planet moves. And you've got to understand, this was totally revolutionary. This is beyond revolutionary.
Right.
Everyone knew there were just 5 planets plus the sun and moon. Except here there was a 6th. There it is. And there was some discussion as to what to call it. Some people wanted to name it after him, and we're kind of lucky that we didn't end up with the planet Herschel. but we didn't. They named it Uranus after the Titan who was the father of Saturn. Since Saturn was the father of Jupiter, so Uranus was the father of Saturn. Okay, that makes sense. And everyone just had to get used to the fact that there was another planet. Now, Uranus, as astrologers have since figured out, and this is a long, slow process, of course. We don't just go, ooh, there's a new planet. I'll decide that it means this, and that. No, you don't do good astrology that way. You do good astrology by saying, okay, here's a new planet. Let's look at how it appears in charts. Let's look at natal charts. Let's look at horary charts. Let's look at mundane charts for nations. What does it do? What does it affect? It's squaring Mars. What does that mean? It's trining Venus. What does that mean? And over a period of decades, or in some cases centuries, gradually you piece together, okay, that's what Uranus means. That's what this newly discovered planet tells us. And Uranus is the planet of revolutions. This is the planet of technology. It's the planet of sudden abrupt change. It's the planet of weirdness. It is the planet of countercultures. understanding for a period before and a period after. All of these things came boiling up. We had the Industrial Revolution, we had the American Revolution, we had the French Revolution, we had the first stirrings of electrical technology. Electricity is very Uranian. We had the first movements toward the idea that gay and lesbian people should be recognized as having a separate sexual identity, rather than just being considered, oh yeah, they're people who do funny things, okay? You have the emergence of certain kinds of countercultures. You have the first stirrings of science fiction, another very Uranian thing. All of this comes boiling up. Now, this does not mean that George Herschel caused this to happen by spotting of Uranus. Quite the contrary, it's the other way around. Uranus was discovered when it was the right time for these influences to come into being. Uranus, in effect, showed himself. He said, "Oh, hi there, Mr. Herschel. Here I am."
Was he? I'm sorry to interrupt, but was he influencing things before his discovery, or did his influence begin at his discovery?
Generally speaking, the influence of a new planet starts one Saturn cycle, about 30 years, before the planet itself is discovered.
Okay. Oh, that's right. That's in the book.
Yeah, that's in the book. So in the course of from the 1760s to the 1790s, you can watch all these revolutionary things starting to stir, but they really hit their stride at the time of the discovery, and immediately thereafter. So you've got that sort of lead-in period. With Uranus, it kind of landed with a boom, because Uranus is that kind of planet. Uranus is not subtle, is not gentle, is not evasive. He kicks down the door. And so a lot of things happened very quickly once he was discovered. So we have that. So there are 6 planets. And of course, at that point, our astronomers were going, oh boy, what if there are other ones out there? So people start searching. We'll get into one of the things that happened, the discovery of Ceres and the asteroids in the middle. But the next real planet that was discovered, of course, was Neptune. And that was the same kind of thing. It was a little subtler, because it wasn't just somebody staring out through a telescope into a particular corner of the sky. People noted that the math didn't work. The movements of Uranus, they were a little fast in some places, a little slow in others. It just didn't work right. And so mathematicians went to work on this and said, oh, there may be another planet out there affecting Uranus by its gravity. So there's this hidden force causing things to slosh back and forth. Keep that in mind as we go. 1846 comes around. 2 different scientists, unbeknown to each other, calculate out where this other planet might be. 2 different teams of astronomers try to find it. One of them gets there first. After a long series of miscommunications and confusions and dropped letters and clues that didn't get picked up on, this is also important. That's Neptune. And when people spotted Neptune, the astronomers, once it had been seen, everybody zoomed in on it with the telescopes. There's this blue disk, very, very far out. And so it got its name because it's blue, it's kind of ocean colored, okay? But as astrologers got to work on Neptune, they figured out this is a very different kind of planet. This planet is evasive. This planet is mysterious, cloudy. It's very difficult to trace what's going on. Where Uranus kicks down the door, Neptune kind of filters in without anyone quite knowing what he's up to. He is the planet of, where Uranus is the planet of science fiction, Neptune is the planet of fantasy. Neptune is the planet of drug abuse. It was after Neptune's discovery that people were going, whoa, drugs. He's the planet of insanity. He's the planet of certain kinds of creativity. He's the planet of illusion and delusion, but also of unity, of mystical experience. And all of these things started becoming social forces, becoming significant factors after Neptune was discovered. And again, there's that 30-year lead time in. You can watch the invention of modern fantasy fiction. You can watch the emergence of interesting dreams and all these other Neptunian factors. And you can also watch the emergence of a very different political style, because Uranus had a political style. We saw it in the American Revolution. We saw it in the French Revolution. It was all and classes and masses. The Communist Manifesto was written 2 years after Neptune was discovered. So you have this idea of unities, whether real unities or fake unities or imaginary unities, and it just kind of goes from there. So that gives us sort of a broad picture